Anybody who could tell you what Predestination is about would be lying.
It's particularly hard to pin down.
It's a very difficult one to describe.
I have no idea what it's about, but I enjoy trying to figure it out.
It's a very difficult one to explain.
It's a really complicated one to talk about, this one.
Predestination's got to be one of the hardest projects to pitch.
I don't know. What is it about? Fuck. Excuse me.
If I was able to say it's like one of the ultimate mindfucks, I would, but I know you can't say that sort of thing.
It's rare where you read a piece of material that is singularly different to anything else that you've read.
I think what Michael and I look for when it comes to material is we're looking for something that's original and interesting, and not only that, but something that exists in a genre that we know and then puts a new spin on it. And I remember reading the short story and thinking I had never read a time travel story quite like that one, and I don't think there'll be another time travel story quite like it ever again.
It's based on a Robert Heinlein short story written in 1959 called All You Zombies.
Zombie flick? Really? Okay.
You will look different to what you remember.
Which is a little misleading because it makes it sound like it's about zombies, which it's not. It's making the point that all of humanity is basically a functioning zombie.
I read the short story quite a while ago and it kind of always stuck with me.
Well, I first heard about it through my agent. With the brief that they sent out, it said, based on the short story, All You Zombies.
In a way, short stories with a really great idea make for better material than a whole novel, which is sort of harder to flesh out.
The second sentence in their brief was, "This is not a zombie flick." And then they didn't try and give any kind of plot synopsis in the brief and just asked you to read this short story.
What the authors of the time, like Robert A. Heinlein, what they were doing was taking certain ideas from academia and philosophy and theology and playing with them in a story dramatic sense.
Heinlein, Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke are considered the legends of the heyday of science fiction writing.
So you're a writer?
I used to be, I guess.
And you're thinking of taking it up again?
I was thinking about it.
Right on.
One could venture a theory that it's about the interconnectedness of man. One could venture it's about the pointless nature of man. I mean, I don't know. It's about a lot of things, but it follows a special agent who's working in time travel and is on a mission to stop a terrorist.
This is certainly a film that really pushes the envelope as far as paradoxes and the complexities of time travel.
Predestination is partly about time travel and time paradoxes and how the choices people make affect the future and how it changes the individuals who have to act out on these alterations in history.
I just was really super excited to possibly get the chance to play both a male and female in the one film. Like that never comes along.
Michael and I had a relationship with Ethan from our last movie. He was in our last film and we had such a good experience with him.
See, I know Peter and Michael. I met them years ago and felt very clearly that they have a unique voice that I really respond to. And they have the same taste in genre movies that I do.
And when we wrote the screenplay, I think Michael and I both said, you know, this would be perfect for Ethan Hawke.
We sent Ethan the script on Thanksgiving. He read it that day. He gave us a call and said, "I'm in. I just have one question. Which part am I playing?" And Peter and I both looked at each other and we thought, not sure yet. We'll figure that out.
The whole character that I play throughout this movie is unique.
How are we going to pull this off? Who is going to be playing what part? And at what point do the parts cross over? Should the part of the unmarried mother and Jane be one actor? Or should the part of Jane and the unmarried mother be two different actors, two genders? What we thought was the most interesting choice was to find one actor that could play both parts.
Creatively, it was probably the most challenging decision that we had to make.
It was also one that was discussed right from the start. And to the Spierig's eternal credit, it was an idea that they came to the project with and pursued.
That's a frightening prospect, to think that we could find someone to pull it off, because if you don't pull it off, the whole movie falls apart.
I believe it's one of the hardest makeups you can do, is to try and take a male or a female and turn them into the opposite gender. And then we came across Sarah Snook.
To develop a character that is the same person with someone who's not the same as you, nor the same gender as you, posed some difficulties.
We're on uncharted territory. Our characters are either oddly similar or exactly the same, depending on how you view it. I think it's always a question of differentiating yourself and finding some kind of sameness. There's no rule about how we're supposed to do that.
The saving grace, I think, is that I'm not playing a man, I'm playing a man who was once a woman. And so I did speak to a friend of mine who is transgender and has recently made the transition from female to male, and got a little bit of insight into what the process is today to do that, but also like, how you feel mentally and emotionally, and what things you feel like you do have control over and what things you don't have control over. And that gave a really good foundation and background from which to work from.
The first thing we did when we started working on the script was just to try and adapt as much of the short story as we could. So we literally just took the short story and put it into a screenplay format, and realised that that was only about 25, maybe 30 pages, which is almost the length of a one act in a screenplay. So we decided to look at what was in that short story and think about how we could expand it and what the elements were that we needed to add to make it a complete story, and have the characters actually go through a significant arc and tell that story in a cinematic screenplay way, rather than just a 10-page short story.
When I read the short story, and when I read the scenes that the Spierigs had released to audition with, I could tell that there was a lot more going on in the script than already present in the short story.
There's a number of things in the screenplay that doesn't exist in the short story. The character of Robertson is not there.
I like those ambiguous characters who work in the world of intelligence.
He's a character that Michael and I both felt needed to be in the film as a kind of mentor and a guide into this world, into this time travel world.
He's seen what man can do, and he understands that sometimes terrible decisions have to be made in order to protect the world at large.
I grew up watching Noah Taylor on screens in Australia, so to have Noah as part of Predestination was quite a thrill.
When I first saw the workshop scene that we did, which was a scene in the script that Peter and Michael had been hesitant to write because they didn't know if they could do it or if the person they cast could do it, and how little we could do to the male character to make him still be male but not so obviously done with prosthetics or special effects.
I don't get out a lot of meet new people.
Why not?
I just don't.
I love working on period films because you get to time travel.
For now, it's right. I think it's cool.
So that moves it down a page as well.
Okay, right. Ah, I see. Cool.
We've got 3 of these, so we can interchange.
But do you want to spend a little bit of time with it?
You know what would be fun is, before as we get close to it, if I could have it in my trailer for a couple days before we use it, and I could practice on it just to get good at it, so I don't look like a novice.
Michael and I spend a lot of time in pre-production designing the movie and doing a lot of storyboards and animatics.
I think communication early is very important in understanding a plan that you collectively want to execute.
Animatics are a great way of explaining to people not only the story ideas but also the shot ideas, the way it's going to be edited. You can add sound effects and music so you can really see the movie before we've shot anything. The great thing about the technology nowadays is we can take the model that's created for the construction team and actually put that into the computer and do fly-throughs and see all the details and find the camera angles within the actual dimensions of the real set before we've even built the set.
And I think if you've done your prep well, then you go into the production knowing very concisely what you need to do, what you need to shoot, what you need to cover.
I think there's always, when you begin a new relationship with the design team, I think there's always a nervousness. From my perspective, I'm nervous because you don't understand who they are necessarily, and in terms of, you know, the relationship that you can have and how you feel them out and how much input and how much you can step into their space and allow them to step into yours.
We've worked with a lot of the same crew on our films, and they kind of get where Michael and I are coming from.
So I've known Peter and Michael for a long time. We went to school together and then ended up going to film school together.
I was at film school and I was doing lots of special effects on my own. Our lecturer at the time said, oh, there's a couple of guys I think you should meet who do a lot of special effects also, and he introduced me to Pete and Mike, and they were doing their zombie shorts at the time.
He's dead.
So that's how we first started to work together. We shared a passion for special effects and just practical effects in general, not just makeup effects, but puppetry, matte paintings, miniatures, all that kind of stuff. So we started making these short films together, which involved all those things, and that's how everything started, and it's never really stopped.
Peter, Michael and I have known each other for a while. I went to uni with them. I designed their first sort of low-budget zombie film.
We kind of tortured the poor man on that movie, and he had absolutely no money and did such an extraordinary job, and we always wanted to work with him again.
Together, I think we've sort of built a relationship where I know sort of what page they're on, I know what they're looking for, so I can sort of get there quite quickly.
There is so much detail in the production design. For a movie that's relatively low budget, there's a tremendous amount of detail and a tremendous amount of care that's gone into it.
So they understand the limitations that we're under, sort of time and financially, so they know that if you're offering things up, it's because that's what you can achieve. Your standard briefcase. Mm-hmm. So once it opens, we've got a shape that big. Mm-hmm. I like the idea that he walks in with what you think is going to be a standard briefcase, but then it sort of pops open and it spins onto its side. So all it needs to do is, in the second case, which is a solid version of this, it's just to reach in and slide up.
Mm-hmm. And this is our bomb?
Well, we're looking... This is a mock-up. I think we should make it shorter.
Absolutely. I think it's got to be smaller because, I mean, we want to also do a shot where the bomb explodes inside.
Yeah.
They know the size of the resources that we've got, so they're more willing to work with you to come up with a solution that'll still help the narrative, still look great, but isn't going to waste a lot of resources.
If you don't have money to throw at a movie, then you have to throw ideas, and then you just start scouring your brain for a better idea.
How do they make it? It's like they do a live cast of a real baby.
The other challenge we had was the flight simulator helmets in Space Corp.
So we had these helmets to teach us, ideas about aerial navigation and flight simulation.
The initial idea was we were going to have a big flight simulator, and because we're working with a relatively low budget, it just wasn't going to happen. So we thought, how can we make this still interesting and sort of futuristic in a 60s sci-fi world?
Like such a simple idea, such a simple way of getting around the fact that we didn't have the money.
That one, yeah, right.
It's just a prototype. It's just.
We modelled the helmets off a 1960s lampshade.
And then a shot from inside with this pattern being projected onto my face.
It's RGB, so it does any colour we want.
Ben didn't like green.
Mm-hmm.
He said we should kill the green and just do white to blue, maybe a bit of red.
Yeah, that's.
And we can program that.
A bit less Christmas-like.
Yeah.
It's so simple, but it looks like I'm in the flight simulation chamber.
Turning beautiful women into men is an average part of the job, done mostly by makeup and prosthetics.
When you get a brief that goes along the lines of, we need a woman to be turned into a guy, and she needs to look enough like a guy that you obviously believe that it's a guy, but not so much that you don't believe that she could have been a woman at one point. And she needs to be different enough that you can believe it's a different person, but not that different that you can't believe that at one point they were the same person.
How are you going to get one male version of one character to look like a female version of that character, but also create a difference between the two? And then how are you going to explain the transition between the two?
We did an extensive amount of testing. I mean, the only way to know about this stuff is you have to test, and chances are you're going to fail a couple times, and then eventually you keep figuring out until it works, and that's a process.
And we designed a makeup that at that point we didn't think was going to be the makeup for the film, but we just wanted a playground to experiment with. And that being the case, we really pushed it. We really put as much rubber on as we could, only because we wanted to take it as far as we could. And we wanted to do that for a couple of reasons. One is we wanted to see at what point the actress just disappeared and it became a makeup. And also we wanted to just experiment putting some of Ethan's likenesses from his head cast into that makeup.
Hey, what can I get you?
Old underwear.
And then from that point, whether it worked or didn't work, we would then know exactly what the next step was going to be for the next test once we knew who was cast in that role, whether it was a case of putting more rubber on or less rubber on. We were all on the same page in the sense that we felt that less was more.
It was really about getting away with as little as possible.
But until we knew who that person was, we just didn't know exactly what the answer was going to be.
The challenge with the prosthetics on Predestination were finding the right balance of reality and simplicity.
Also, as part of that process was understanding how the prosthetics and the makeup, including the makeup artists, dialogued with the actress and how it impacted on her preparation and ultimately on her performance.
And we really realised that this was going to be a very important collaboration with the actor. So when Sarah came on board, it was very much about her owning the makeup and her really playing a huge role in that makeup being a success, and us really lending as much as we could to her performance without covering her up so that her performance couldn't shine.
When you're changing a human being from one gender into another, it's very complicated because we all know what that's going to look like, as opposed to a monster where it can be a complete fantasy creation and you can kind of go nuts with it. So this ended up being the hardest makeup Steve and his team has ever tried to do.
Becoming unmarried mother is a process. It's not an unenjoyable process. It was a pleasure to work with Sam and Steve.
The appliances that we ended up using on Sarah were a combination of silicone and one tiny little transfer.
What we did with that was we had a brow piece just to put some nods in there to Ethan. Ethan's got these awesome forehead lines. We just put those in there.
I'd bought audiobooks because I thought that I would need them, and I just vague out, tune out, and put in some speakers, but I've not listened to any of them because we just sit and chat for 3 hours, sometimes 3.5, sometimes 4. There was once when prosthetics was for the burn makeup for the Violin Man, when it was 6. And time goes really fast sometimes, and then sometimes time goes really slowly. Especially when there's a clock in front of you and you're like, move the clock out of the way. So for Unmarried Mother, I have a chin put on, chin piece, which has some really nice little stubble.
And we also did like a nose piece, which just covered like the top of her nose. It didn't go over her nostrils. It was so small, but it made such a dramatic change.
That's Sarah's nose.
So this is Sarah's nose here, and this is our test sculpt, where we're just changing the shape of the profile. We don't want to add anything like any kind of real broadness to the front, so we're just going to focus on changing that profile.
Yeah, right.
And then we had earlobes as well.
It is really interesting because when you put the chin on and the nose on without the earlobes, because they've lengthened my face and enlarged parts of my face, without the earlobes it looks really unbalanced. I think that's a little moment of genius from Steve, lengthening my ears, because he wouldn't really think to do that.
All those components were very carefully thought out, and we experimented with all of them to make sure that the blending edges were in the right place, especially around the mouth so that it didn't crinkle.
After the nose, chin and ears go on, they airbrush my face. They start doing more detailed work, more speckling and breaking things up, really making my skin look like it's weathered a lot. I've got old age stipple where it's like more glue on my face to make my skin pucker and make it look older. Then there's the wig and the hair. It's a long process, yes. And it's a process getting it off as well.
Everything was just toning everything back to create a makeup that was simple, but by no means easy.
So there's a kiss scene in the film where I kiss myself. We shot one side of the kiss as me as Jane, and then I went away for 3 hours, got man makeup on, and came back and shot the other side. When I'm Jane, I had to kiss a guy, stand-in, and then when I was a guy, I had to kiss my girl, stand-in. And it was the first shot of the film we ever did. We did it in pre-production, and it was not going to be in the film, which it is.
They say that the journey of 1,000 miles starts right at your feet. My feet sure could use a rest.
So that you're running a little slice.
Ben Nod is somebody who we worked with on our last movie, and he did such a great job and really gets what Michael and I are going for in terms of the look.
My role as the DP and my relationship with Peter and Michael is such that we have built an element of trust through previous relationships, and now I guess we've developed a shorthand.
5 different people reflected here to start with, so you could crowd this mirror. Do you know what I mean? With heads.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you be there, I'll find you. No, but he can actually be down and in amongst it.
Yeah.
So I'll find you there, so there can be one kid there, and then another kid's head here by camera, and then another kid somewhere else. You know, and in that mirror you can have.
We should absolutely do that.
We made very clear choices in prep as a collective, how different eras and different sets should be represented.
We wanted the viewer to seamlessly believe where they were each time we time jumped. So a lot of times, if we go to the 40s, we really restricted ourselves to being quite iconically 40.
And then the hand comes in, catches it like that, pulls it back, and then you walk through holding the baby in the arm.
I do believe that the relationship with the designer is, I mean, it's obviously paramount, because it's not just the sets. It's not just the finishes, not just the lighting. It's also, you know, I think the designer needs to assume some responsibility for the entire look of the film, you know, including how wardrobe sits within his sets.
The first brief with the directors, I think, was to undo the puzzle that they had created. It was very much about breaking down character and era. The journey is quite elaborate because the personality splits in certain directions. That person has to reflect a lot of different journeys, a lot of different time travels. So yeah, there's a lot of dissection of character before we actually got into design. Peter and Michael had a reference of David Bowie that they had really liked, and they'd shown Ethan, and Ethan really liked it. And then I extended it to other icons of an era that we could relate an era to. Keith Richards was referenced, Andy Warhol is referenced, Willie Nelson ended up being referenced. Ethan was very interested in being involved in the character, but he was also interested in listening to what a costume designer actually had to say.
Jane had a lot of costumes for a character that no one really thought was in the film much. They all thought that, you know, it was unmarried mother. Jane has a lot to wear.
There is a signature tone. There's a signature tone of a green colour. We break away from it a little bit, but very gently. The little girl has a little green cardigan. When she's 17, that same colour comes back. So developing Jane's character, basically she starts as a baby and we meet her every 5 to 10 years. So it had to be a progression of a girl that was growing up, and growing up through time. I wanted to reflect that in the silhouette of her costumes, and also her progression through to a man. So we went from skirts, flared skirts, to pencil skirts, and then to a straight 1960s A-line look. She wasn't a very feminine, prissy little girl. So the silhouette of time actually meant that I could kind of go into trousers when she goes into the 1960s working for another family. So it was a natural progression of both history and fashion, and it carried her character through. So it kind of all managed to marry together very well.
Once you've got a very strong design philosophy, you've got a very well-crafted film. And I think that everybody recognises that once they see it. You know, they go, wow. And they may not know why it's wow, but they go, wow.
And crane, action, Ethan.
So all films have their budget and schedule limitations. What we did on Predestination was found some locations that we could use multiple times. One of those was the Abbotsford Convent.
We have these vignettes in the film, and they're literally like a quarter-page vignettes. And the difficulty when you're doing very brief scenes is they can consume your day, because you want to shoot in a park, but then you also have to shoot in a classroom, or you have to go and shoot in an orphanage, or whatever it may be. And they're such small vignettes, it consumes your day travelling from one location to the next.
We could find locations like the convent that gave us basically a studio backlot. It is a location, but using walls smartly here and there, you could divide it up into different spaces. Put a wall in here, a door in there, and it serviced many sets throughout what is our time frame, from 1940s orphanage through to various apartments in 60s for Brooklyn and Cleveland.
Time travel can be disorienting. Even short jumps can knock you around a bit. Don't ever exceed the jump limit. It can be problematic.
So Melbourne was great in having that as an asset, that we could shoot a lot of different scenes in the one place.
Without that location, we would not have been able to make the film on time and on budget.
What's interesting to me about this project is the visual variety, the fact that it's about 8 different films in one film.
The film itself travels over 60 years and wild events.
Okay, and cutting this.
The fun of it is how much it plays inside different genres, in different, you know, in one aspect it's film noir, another aspect it's sci-fi.
Good. And action.
So I play a character called Jane, who grew up in an orphanage. She was left on the doorstep of the Cleveland orphanage, and she grows up there always feeling like an outcast and always being the outsider. She's a bit of a tough little chick. She gets into scraps in the playground and often with the boys. She's never really found a place in her life that she feels safe and at home.
We've been having some fun, you know. Punching dinner. Yeah.
Alright, Ben, not? Good.
Of course Monique likes beating me up. It's
my dream.
Seriously. Bang. She might hit me right now. I don't know. Yeah, see?
Coming back. Fighting, struggling. Coming back, fighting, yeah, fighting. Make sure not to fall back, keep going. Yeah, that'll be good.
Stop it! Get off! Enough.
Thank you.
I mean, they're funny, these films. They need the best people because we've got 6 weeks and that's not enough. And the money's tight and blah, 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 blah. But Predestination has been a fantastic film to work on.
Having an incredibly good crew, both all the crew from Queensland and from Victoria, who really did embrace the project, and a very difficult piece of material for the resources that we had.
You don't see a lot of guys using these anymore.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
This is, I get kind of sentimental about the past.
That's cool. Me too.
It was my second time shooting in Australia, and I really pray that I have a third. You know, so Aussies know how cool they are, so I don't need to tell them.
We took a very low-tech approach to quite a lot of the physical effects, which also translates over to the visual effects.
We're going to do this, and the second pass was going to be the gas fireball with the stunt guy.
The way we did our time jumps is we didn't want to do some sort of kind of CG ball or some kind of ripple or any of that kind of stuff. We wanted to do something that just had the physical space around the actors move, and that was as simple as literally shooting a bunch of different elements of things moving, and it was literally me moving things. And then we joined it all together, and you add the sound effects, and you add, the actor coming into the shot. I think it's pretty convincing.
People feel part of a collective, and they feel that they can openly contribute. I really am into the fact that the dolly grip can lean over and whisper, "What about we do da 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 da?" And I'll absolutely consider that. Otherwise, you're a lone boat in a big sea. And everyone will just let you sink because they think you meant to sink if you sink, But if you invite everybody into the process, then they are your life raft.
Hold it up higher.
In Heinlein's short story, the time machine was like a net, and we felt like that was too impractical. So we came up with the idea of the violin case.
There's something about the old gangsters with their Tommy gun and a violin case. There's a great image.
The idea is that he's inconspicuous.
You could ignore it completely. And if you saw the violin case and you saw that there were, there was a kind of a complex-looking lock system, but that's all you'd think it was, a complex lock system, not a complex time travel device.
And there's something about music that transports you through time.
We wanted to do a wide establisher of New York City, and shooting in Melbourne, and there's a limited amount of options. So we decided that we were only going to dress a small section of a road and then build the rest of it digitally.
So we were basically given the task to dress from street level to the first floor, and the rest would be digitally added. So our big challenge was to find vehicles, street dressing, We added a few neon signs, what we could afford, to the street, and basically the rest of that will be added later.
I think the fun thing is you see the silhouette. You know, that's fucking him. And so you just come in ready to blast this guy to smithereens, as Yosemite Sam would say.
Ethan was a lovely guy. You know, it's always nice to work with people whose, you know, work you admire, and they turn out to be nice people.
He's very enthusiastic and passionate, and it's so wonderful to see someone who's had the breadth of experience he's had and still have that driving passion that searches for a truth in the moment every day. He really goes after each scene as if every little moment counts.
So with the Fizzle Bomber, I thought, well, if he'd been through this process of going through time so often, he'd be a little bit crazy. He'd probably let himself go because he had this grand sense of a larger purpose. So he'd let go of grooming, and there would be all these other accidents that he'd been through on other missions. So we started to think, instead of just white hair and stipple, we looked at other ways, like let's give him like this longer beard, let's give him longer hair, let's make his eyesight messed up, let's give him scars from a previous mission, and also just some rotten dentures as if teeth had been damaged. And originally, when we got the long-haired wig, we were going to put it on him and just cut it to the right length. I remember the first initial makeup test where Ethan was standing in front of the mirror and he put the wig on, and just as he was putting the wig on, his whole posture changed. And I just knew that it was the right thing. We didn't cut it after that. It just worked. And then just from that, Ethan just took it to this whole new level.
Every movie that's ever dealt with time travel, from Time Bandits forward, that I've ever seen in my life, there's a certain joy you get out of trying to unravel the mystery. But if you did that, then wouldn't that change that? And if that was changed, wouldn't that be different?
You have no idea what's right for me.
All we have is each other. It is all we've ever had. Now, if you shoot me, you'll become me.
You realise that if time travel exists, they're with us now. Which is really scary, which is so true as well, because where would you go? If I invented time travel in the future, where would I go? Visit myself back in the past.
If you could go back, whether that would affect your present and future anyway. It fascinates people, although you can buy time machines on the internet, apparently. I'm not saying they work.
Some people say that it's fake. But you and I, we know. Some things are predestined. Right? I made you who you are. You made me who I am. It's a paradox, right? But it can't be paradoctored. Right.
So within the concept of predestination, there's the million-dollar question: is everything preordained, or can events be altered, or are you always stuck in a loop? No matter what alterations you do, the end will be the same.
Whether there is fate or chance or only predestination.
That's what I find most captivating about the movie, or anything having to do with time travel, is the nature of fate and the nature of free will. And why is it in our lives that every time something's happened, it feels like it was inevitable? Like that was the way it was always meant to be?
I feel like it may only be predestination. You can change little bits, but we're all kind of stuck on a path.
When we're imagining our future, it seems as if it could go in so many thousands of directions. I think that is at the essence of what is interesting about the idea of predestination.
And some people, like Barkeep, Unmarried Mother, Jane, Fizzle Bomber, they're all stuck on the same path, and it just is a bit of a tragic one.
The editor tends to start on a film just at the end of pre-production. I come in and the shoot begins, and it allows me to basically start telling the story as it's being shot. Of course, I'm cutting all the way through the shoot, basically just assembling the footage as we go, and it's not until the shoot is finished and we set up in true post-production that the honing of the story actually begins. That's the fun time, you know, the directors and myself sit down and mine the footage for the best way to tell the narrative.
pumping station was a great location that we found sort of last minute. You could walk straight into the building, not have to build or touch a thing. It's an impressive place to shoot in.
It's an interesting thing, film noir, because of course it's as much about the content of the story as it is about the way that it looks, by definition. But from my perspective, I've tried to use shadow and shadow play a lot.
We also added in this thriller element, which didn't really exist in the short story. There was maybe 1 or 2 sentences in the short story about stopping a fizzle bomb, and we took that and kind of created a villain around that concept.
3, 2, 1, go!
So the burn makeup was an issue unto itself because for me it was the one opportunity we had to create a transition between Sarah and Ethan's look. Because when we got the head cast of Sarah and the head cast of Ethan, they were so distinctly different. There's no way we could have just explained it away as, skin grafts or something like that. There had to be something structurally that was damaged.
There's always that risk when you do a burn makeup that you can end up in the land of burnt pizza. Steve's sculpt from the start made sure that it wasn't going to end in that direction.
On Sarah's head cast, we created a burn makeup where I just put a lot of Ethan's proportions back in there, like the length of his chin, the top of her brow, creating bigger ears, even though they were all melted off. But just starting with that foundation.
Which took a while. It was about 6 hours. So there's like a cowl that goes on your back, like as if you're wearing a hat that extends to below your shoulders, and then there's pieces that go around your eyes and then around your mouth.
Dentures to make it look like her teeth had all been destroyed. And we also had these contact lenses made. I designed them very specifically to make it look like the pupils had all been steamed.
And then they have to spray it, and then they have to paint it, and they stick bits of hair on the top to make it look like I've had burnt hair. The crowning glory to make this whole makeup look real is they put KY jelly all over my face. Everywhere, just rub it in all over to make it look really fresh and burnt and bloody. Sitting and set with a face full of lubricant. It's an interesting thing though, because when you see people and you talk to them, you can't see what you look like, so you're talking normally, not like a burns victim, and they're talking to you a bit like this. Like, hey, are you okay? Can I get you something? Can I get you some water? No, I'm fine. What have I got something on my face?
Well, I'm playing this fight scene where I'm fighting myself in another time period. And so, who would win such a fight? The idea we had was that he was well matched. There's a technical thing about it that is really difficult because usually if you're doing a fight scene, if your coverage is not good, if a hit doesn't sell on your coverage, they can cut to the other coverage. But if you're fighting yourself, it's always you. And so it becomes more difficult to make it work.
So we discovered the RMIT building through a magazine, and the architecture was so striking that we hunted it down.
Nobody had ever shot in there before. We were the first ones to use it.
The design of the building is very contemporary in today's world, but the way that we were able to shoot it and give it sort of a mod 60s space theme, it suited the narrative perfectly.
We added in the flight simulator helmets, we added in some gym equipment, we added in a few little bits and pieces of dressings, but that building gave us so much.
Really stark, minimal, futuristic look, and also that kind of space era futurism of the 60s, or of their perception of what the future is going to be like in a way.
It allowed us to create scope without having to spend a lot of money.
I really loved how they And they did it on purpose. They incorporated the design of the building into the Space Corp logo. But it just makes it look like we built the Space Corp building, which we didn't.
And action!
We spent a few days in pre-production before we started shooting learning to fight. We learnt all the choreography, learnt how to trick the camera without making contact and without punching. You know, throwing your head back as if you have been hit and had an impact under your chin or on your side, and you know, they hid little pads, and you know, you really go for it. You do actually throw a punch so that it looks real.
The difference between Unmarried Mother and Jane was not only to make Unmarried Mother masculine, but to make Jane more feminine. When we see Jane going into Space Corps, she's actually wearing a completely figure-hugging, slinky, early 60s boucle dress. She's all woman and very sexy and gorgeous as a woman.
We got to wear this amazing blue and white 60s retro fun time outfit, which was so perfectly in tune with 60s futurist ideals.
We wanted to make a futuristic look, but actually futuristic if you had been in the early 60s. So it was a projection from the 50s into the 60s.
Jane, who, because of her intelligence, she gets approached when she's about 17 by a character called Mr. Robertson, played by Noah Taylor, who invites her to join Space Corp,
which is a centre for training astronauts and young female recruits to be companions to astronauts.
and to be everything that a female companion on Earth as a wife would do, like cook and clean and take care of the household. But for Jane, it's close to a dream come true. She'd love to be an astronaut, but if she can get up to space, then that's good enough for her.
But again, Space Corps has a slightly ulterior motive in recruiting candidates for the Temporal Bureau, who are elite individuals with specific family histories that allow them to be suitable for that line of work.
So Mr. Robertson in Jane's life is, I guess, the closest to a father figure that she's ever had, in the way that it is a paternal presence that she really wants to impress.
He has bigger plans for her, and he has a kind of a knowledge of her future.
And then she gets kicked out of Space Corp. I think the most devastating part about that is not just that her dream has been crushed, but that the one person who took a gamble on her, she's disappointed them.
In a way, he knows that he's going to have to subject her to some pretty radical and painful, life-changing experiences, in his perception, I guess, for the greater good of mankind.
There were a couple of sets that we knew we had to build, and one of them was the bar.
So this is the bar, Pop's Place. We needed to build a full 360 set. So it includes the entrance from the street above, stairs down onto the main floor, our bar, which is set up as a sort of a half an island bar. There's doors to an office, to the basement, booths. We pretty much had to build the entire bar to give us enough space to shoot in. This whole booth section here will float away. Various sections of the walls can get pulled out. So to shoot in here for 2 weeks, you need to be able to get the crew in and out quite easily. The look of the bar is within our 1970s palette, which is autumn tones. It's very brown, orange, amber glass, brass fittings, and that sort of signifies the 70s.
You know, there's a certain amount of logic in how you tailor each of those environments to the story. And in this case, we filled it full of smoke, and the lighting is sympathetic to the warm tones of the bar.
It needed to be textural and layered enough to hold interest.
Well, one of the things that makes this movie so unique is that about 50% of it takes place in this bar, and yet the film itself travels over 60 years, but it's all centered around a very simple story being told while two people get drunk. It all has to happen in the minutiae of two characters interacting with each other.
A man walks into a bar, talks to a barkeep.
What do you do?
Whatever I have to.
Yeah. Well, it's tough making a living, that's for sure.
What do you know about tough?
As much as the next guy, I guess.
He tells this barkeep about his life.
4 cents a word, I write confession stories. The Unmarried Mother is my pen name.
They lay a bet. This guy wants a bottle of whiskey and is happy to lay his dearest story on the line for the whiskey.
Bet you the rest of that bottle I got the best story you ever heard.
That in itself is kind of unique and a nice device for a movie.
You're sort of watching that bar scene play out thinking, what was all that stuff at the beginning about? You assume it's going one way, and then it turns into something else, and we take them on this unconventional journey where everything is interconnected.
That's a good shot right there.
I think we got
Jeez, she goes through everything. And then he goes through everything as well. Like, she grows up an orphan, she has the love of her life leave her pregnant during the birth, discovers that she's actually a hermaphrodite, so gets turned into a man, thinks that she's going to raise the kid as a single father, the kid gets kidnapped. He, by this stage, moves to New York, becomes a writer, spirals further and further down into, self-loathing and depression and disgust, and is, on the path of a prolonged suicide as an alcoholic. It's a rough life. So entering that emotional world has been, it sounds weird, but enjoyable to engage with that side, the dark side. But then technically you have to play it all as a man. That's tricky. Very covert and secretive, but I knew it would change my life for the better. At one point, I did go out to learn how to play pool properly with some guys, friends of mine. They taught me how to play pool. Still not very good.
It was so much fun to work with Ethan again. He's such a talented actor and such a contributor. He likes to get involved in the script. He likes to offer up suggestions. It was such a fun atmosphere. It was such a fun experience.
Michael was saying that I'm analytical when I work, and I didn't realize, but perhaps I am. But I think both of them are as well. And maybe that's why I enjoy working with them, because I think that's a good thing, because you know where you stand. And the best part about that, though, is that within that there is definitely room to move. They're not closed to ideas. They don't have a complete structure that if you mess around with it, that everything's going to be ruined, which is kind of very brave of them as well, given it's a time travel film, that if you change one thing, then, it's a knock-on effect. Things change after that.
I like to operate the camera because I think in choosing the nuance of where the frame goes and what the frame sees, and in doing that I think that you're crafting the story and crafting the way that the audience perceives the movie. We use 2 cameras, 2 Arri Alexas. Terrific, love them. A deep love affair with the Alexa and the Arri system.
When I was a little girl.
What?
Oh, you want me to tell my story?
Cut that. Yep, that's it.
I mean, come on. Sometimes you got it. Boom.
There's an element of love between the barkeep and the unmarried mother. The thing that really has sewn us all together is that they are all in love with each other, which is they're in love with themselves. But they're not, because they're the same person in different time periods. So they are 2 physically tangible different people, except they are the same person as the thread through time.
Sorry to interrupt.
A temporal agent is someone who works for the Temporal Bureau, and they're, I guess, time-travelling cop is one word for it. They possibly have to perform assassination duties and things like that at great personal cost to their own lives.
You accept that any diversion from your mission parameters will result in the immediate court-martial, and if convicted, death by lethal injection.
I do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And so the Temporal Bureau is a combination between something like NASA and the CIA and some very, very black ops, highly secret government organisation. And also at the heart of it, it's a kind of detective agency as well. And they set out to correct situations that have happened and that will happen.
With the facial transplant, it was actually like as if Ethan's face maybe belonged to someone else originally and was then transplanted on. And then we could explain the difference in bone structures.
We kind of dubbed it the mini Frankenstein makeup. The whole idea that it had been, you know, different parts of skin grafted together and that the skin was different flesh tones. That was so much fun to paint.
It's actually a really exciting makeup for us because it's the first time we see Ethan's character in the film. What we're trying to basically say with this makeup is we're just trying to do a whole face transplant to help explain the transformation of an earlier stage of the character to this later stage. It's really challenging actually because we're trying to do something that's quite complicated. You know, we're completely covering his face with all this rubber, but at the same time we want it to be quite a subtle look. It's a full silicone makeup. There's a cowl piece, a separate forehead piece, separate little side areas here to make it look like all the little scars all join up and that sort of thing. And then we have more stitch marks that will go onto the neck. So yeah, it's a really, really cool makeup. It's a really good one to do. When we were working on the design, we were just looking at the different face transplants and how they're put together. And it's actually really amazing how once they heal, it looks incredible. Like it really looks like you know, like the person's own face. But there's just that there's that asymmetrical aspect of it. So we tried to replicate that as well. So we've just put like a little prosthetic piece on this eyelid so that it won't open properly. So that just, you know, once he first opens his eyes, it's going to be a little bit asymmetrical. We've also got contact lenses. There was some of the lenses. Some of the inspirations for the lenses that inspired me were actually some cornea implants where they actually replace the cornea of the eye, actually have stitches in the eyeball. So we've got some lenses designed to actually have stitches around the iris, and he's going to be wearing those at the same time he's wearing all this. So he's really been put back together and reconstructed.
Love travels on a gravel road.
We are on our way.
When you describe it to people, it sounds so over the top. But then we need to design the makeup to make it look like it's completely natural, to make it look like we've done next to nothing.
I feel like I should talk slowly.
I know, because you think I'm actually here, but I'm actually fine. And we're gonna go dancing later.
The most extreme things were going to be the scars around the head. But the whole rest of it was rubber. The whole rest of it was the sculpt. And we just needed to make all those elements look absolutely invisible on the day.
We wrap the bandages around you in a way that sort of reveals this area first. Last. First.
Okay, working with you guys is so exciting.
First. Yeah.
You do what it takes, I'm getting used to.
The Sub Rockies is a beautiful set. It's very graphic, it's very clinical, it's quite ambiguous as to where you are, what period in time you are. Ethan's character, he's the only one in that scene that wears any colour or breaks out of the suits or the lab coats. So you actually can really pinpoint him as this is a man about to go on a journey.
You know, I alluded to the fact that there's many different photographic styles in this film. One of them is this set called the Sub Rockies, which is a sort of futuristic stepping off point for our time-travelling characters. It's very clean, there's no smoke. The architecture is quite futuristic, and so we made the lighting quite futuristic.
We had to be quite resourceful with the things that we could build. As in Sub Rockies, we had certain elements that we used to configure for one part of Sub Rockies, but then sort of rejigged or reconfigured them to make 2 other different spaces inside the one complex.
Thinking about the processes that your body would go through from going from one time period to another and the temporal travel and how that affects your body. And I kind of like to imagine it that it's like a massive compression chamber that your organs just suck in like that. In filming that and kind of generating that feeling, a lot of the time the camera would start and then rolling, turn over, would spin around in circles, like make ourselves really, really dizzy, and then on action, then drop onto our knees as if we'd just landed.
You're home.
And there's this kind of dynamic between the barkeep and the unmarried mother of who's in power at what point and who has the status and who has the hold over the other person, who's in more danger. And hopefully when the audience are watching it, they don't know at any point who does, because the unmarried mother can look a little bit freaky sometimes and a little bit on edge, a little bit volatile, until they get taken down into the barkeep's lair downstairs. And then maybe it's the barkeep who has all the power.
Our time disruption footprint needs to be extremely small. The Bureau will allow for slight variations, but ultimately the parameters are extremely strict. Any deviation from the mission will result in termination. Okay?
Okay.
3, 2, 1, action!
We did physical effects that are very simple with a locked off camera.
So what they would do is take a plate of the scene without us in it.
We would just move stuff towards where they were.
Peter did some of that sometimes. Get a leaf blower and blow bits of paper or curtains. Family would come in and perform our little dizzy dance, and the camera's rolling and we'd drop in and join those two together as if we've just arrived.
And it's actually really super simple but really effective.
You know, a movie that's designed to be deep or meaningful or something like that sometimes feels like it's teaching you and it's a little boring and is not what you want to do after a hard day's work. But if a movie can be simultaneously really entertaining and be about something, it can hit the bullseye for me.
Sadly, that was Ethan Brooks. I would really like to say thank you. I swear, this is the most amazing crew. I want to thank Peter and Michael for writing this amazing script and for putting all of you guys together. I've had such a great time. I hate leaving. Do a great job next week. Don't let the whole thing fall the fuck. All right? Okay. Listen to Sarah. She knows best.
In the scene where unmarried mother realises he's the stranger, Jane thinks that she's just meeting someone and they're going to leave in a moment. In the end, they don't, and they end up going for coffee. But her, I guess, intention coming into the scene is to meet the person and move on. Whereas unmarried mothers is to meet the person and kill them.
We have a number of scenes where Sarah Snook acts with herself.
It's an interesting experience playing two characters in the one scene where you're completely responsible for the final product.
That we did in a very traditional, low-tech way in which she will act with a double to have eye lines and lines fed to her, and then we'll just swap her around, put her in the other makeup and have another double act opposite her.
So in rehearsing that, you have to tell the other actor that you're working opposite what you want them to do, in a way. And I'm just not going to do that in any other context ever.
It's not a new technique, it's been around forever.
But then for the cafe scene where they're sitting down and they're engaging with each other and talking with each other, and really they're falling in love with each other, it's something that you need to really carefully craft and make sure that you're hitting the same physical movements that you want so that the other actor can copy, but also that you're getting what you need in terms of creating a performance here from the other actor.
Again, low tech in the way we did it. We added just split screens down the middle and over the shoulders with wigs and that of the other stand-ins and doubles.
But it's a strange situation to rehearse a scene with 3 people to be seen with only 2 people who are both me in the final product.
And my hope is that when you watch it, you aren't paying any attention to the fact that she's not actually acting opposite herself.
I think the most interesting part about playing both characters in the scene is that you really have to trust the directors, and a lot of the control of that scene comes afterwards in the edit.
So what makes you so superior?
I can read minds.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, what am I thinking right now?
Well, my greatest wish for every good director I've ever worked with is I wish I could bestow on them the gift of having a twin. Most directors, let's face it, if they're good, they think they know everything and they understand everything. But Peter and Michael have the benefit of their brother saying next to them, like, well, that sounded obnoxious.
They're very clear and they're very organized, and they know what they want and they know what they can see in the final product.
They won't knock heads about things. One guy is simply more passionate than the other guy, and the other guy recognises the threshold of passion and backs off.
It seems like a very, natural relationship. It was never odd having two people in charge, because potentially, I guess, that could be difficult.
Good.
To work in partnership really helps, because film is just such a naturally dictatorial position that the idea of a shared thing, it helps the whole thing. Because you can agree with Michael and while disagreeing with Peter.
They're really great with performance and very, I think, kind of appreciative of actors, which isn't always the case.
So when Jane changes to a man, I've already started the progression. Even as a young child, I had put her in trousers at one stage. I'd actually put her into straight silhouettes. So when she went into a suit, it wasn't such a shock to an audience that silhouette has actually been developing over time.
The unmarried mother, against his will, falls in love with Jane again, and against his will has to leave her again. Can you imagine leaving the love of your life, the person that you've finally found, as a person who has grown up as an orphan, never been able to trust anyone, never had anyone as their friend, finally finds one person who is all of those things, and then they leave. And then you find out that that was actually you from the future, and you have to do it again. And against your will, you fall in love with yourself still. And so how do you make that part work beyond that moment in the script is to sow love into the other characters' lives as well. So the barkeep is in love with the unmarried mother. The fizzle bomber is in love with the barkeep.
All we have is each other.
Each future character can't help but be enchanted by their past self, which is sad, because they'll never be together properly. It's the paradox that can't be paradoxed.
Well, one of the biggest challenges of cutting this film was the fact that essentially it's just one long conversation in a bar between two people. So, of course, to make that interesting, the way the script was structured was that a lot of the story was told through flashback. The challenge here was, of course, to keep that interesting. The coverage in the bar was great, and we were able to make that dialogue play.
If they accepted me, they would teach me how to walk and dance and, how to listen to a man pleasingly.
And then when we got into the flashbacks, of course, that's when we went to a lot of different locations, a lot of different time periods. And it was kind of bound together by a lot of voiceover, which was always backed up by visuals.
This is our second film working with Matt Biller. He is somebody that has such an eye for detail. The great thing about having an editor too who isn't there on set the whole time or doesn't understand the kind of pain that went through getting a shot is that he just purely reacts to, does the material work. And it doesn't matter if it took you 3 hours to get the shot or not. It's about, is the story being told in the best possible way?
One of the things that I love about working with the guys is that it's an incredibly evolutionary process.
We'll walk into Matt's edit suite in the morning. He'll show us the edit of a scene. We'll give him notes. And then he'll go off and work on that scene for the rest of the day while Peter and I will go off and do visual effects.
Michael and I did a number of visual effects, which is similar to what we did on our last movie. And we do everything from simple split screens to complicated green screens.
Matte paintings, set extensions.
You know, when you have an idea and you want that to translate on screen and you haven't been able to afford the artists to do it, you end up just figuring it out yourself.
They'll take on another 150 VFX shots that aren't in the budget. And so they increase their production value incredibly by exercising those skills.
Cutting Edge handled a number of the visual effects, some of the more complex ones.
For example, our New York City wide establishing shot.
What you see in the foreground is, for the most part, real, with extensions up the side of the walls of the buildings, and then everything from a point from mid-ground backwards is complete digital, including the buildings, the cars, and even the people walking on the sidewalk. And when you're dealing with a period film, you have to remove certain elements that are modern day and things like that.
Cutting Edge, providing us with a number of really complex visual effects. For example, our season changes, lots of compositing work, matte paintings, time travel effects.
Some complex firework. There's quite a few difficult rig removals and things like that.
The other incredible experience on this job, which I've never had before, is one of the directors is also the composer.
This is my first feature film score, and I wanted to write a score that suited a computer-based piece of music. So everything that's written for the film is all done within the computer, largely with big samples. The idea behind the themes in Predestination was largely to create very, very simple pieces of music.
The music was constantly evolving as we were cutting, and the cut could change to suit the music could change to suit the cut. And that was a tremendous gift, really, in collaboration.
There's a whole section of the movie that is largely 2 notes. The movie is so complex, I wanted to try and simplify the score and keep it relatively low-key.
Same thing. Exact same thing. Exact same thing. Exact same thing.
Voiceover was particularly important in this film, just from the point of view of it is basically one big long story being told in a bar. We cut through to flashbacks.
What did you call me?
But that narration keeps on going. The beauty of that, in a sense, is that we kept honing the voiceover and honing what was being said to serve the story.
The person I knew was truly gone.
The tools of being able to write through the edit process and construct shots through the edit process was really invaluable for making sure the story was told the best way it possibly could be.
Look, you, I'm guessing you don't celebrate.
The look of me. What do I look like?
Whenever I work on a film, it takes me a long time before I can just relax and watch it as a movie. The first time I saw this film, even though it was a rougher cut, I felt immensely proud of it.
I've had an excellent time shooting this. It's been a dream role and an incredible opportunity to work with people who are so good at their jobs. And also it's a period film, so I get to wear awesome costumes. I get to be a man.
Coming from a place where more often than not we make monsters, it was a very, very different challenge because there was nothing to hide behind. Either you felt that this was someone who had changed sex or you didn't. Everything was right there. So I think for me, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career for that reason.
I hope that audiences just really enjoy getting caught up in a very unpredictable plot.
The script that we wrote is pretty much the final film that you see now, and while we've added new elements, the short story is definitely there.
As well as being sort of very exciting, it's kind of quite a moving story as well, you know, and I think because of Ethan and Sarah's performances particularly, you really feel for the characters and their journey.
I think, and I hope, but I really think that we as a team of, you know, making this film have created enough of a solid world that the audience will buy into that.
Hopefully the sameness will really come from the tone of the movie.
They'll see me and go, right, that's him later, okay, we get it.
I responded to it because it's just thought-provoking and entertaining at the same time. I'm playing a guy who's a bartender, and I'm playing a guy who's on a recruiting mission for a special secret government agency. I mean, it's kind of awesome. I mean, it's the stuff that sci-fi novels are made of.
While all filmmaking is very, very difficult, I'm not sure that you could experience a smoother running production.
It's a massive effort from a lot of people who really cared about the film and wanted the film to be as good as it could be.
I can fairly accurately predict that I won't get a chance in another film in my future to play opposite myself, as well as future male and past female versions of myself. That's probably not going to happen again.